Well, first it was House Speaker Nancy Pelosi saying the president was morbidly obese. Now, a famous Democratic strategist said the president is going to get, and I quote, his fat ass beat. I'm Scott Ott, and this episode of Bill Whittle Now is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com and our friends over at the Patriot Post. We'll give you more information about them at the end of this episode, and check out the link in the description below. Bill, James Carville rises again. He of fame, he managed Bill Clinton's presidential campaign, and on a podcast, the Stuttering John podcast with John Melendez, Carville kind of went off on a little tirade saying, and I quote, he, meaning Donald Trump, he's going to get his ass beat. All right, he's going to get his fat ass beat. The question is by how much? And he went on basically to say that Democrats really need to take it to him. I'll get into more detail with that later, because they can win 290 or 295 votes in the Electoral College with their eyes closed, but that's not going to change anything. Bill, Carville, pretty shrewd political analyst, has his finger come off the pulse of the American public?
Isn't he the shrewd political analyst who, after Barack Obama's election in 2008, on that very day, said this is the beginning of a Democratic majority in the House, Senate, and the presidency for 40 years?
I'll have to check my book of James Carville quotations. I'm not sure on that.
I'm pretty sure it was him. Turns out he was off by 38 years. He rivals Paul Krugman in accuracy. And that's quite an achievement, actually, when you think about it.
And he's not even an economist, so that's impressive.
No, a stop clock is at least right twice a day. So I don't really much care what Carville says. All of these kind of things to me, when somebody says, we're going to get it, we're going to take it to him, and we're going to whip his ass, this is a sound of a party that knows it's in real trouble and hasn't got a candidate, knows it hasn't got a candidate, is very likely going to have to switch candidates, and all of the confusion that entails. They've got a candidate who can't finish his sentence while Donald Trump is up there doing 1 hour long briefings on how many thousands of moving parts are in place on the coronavirus. Whether or not you agree with his decisions, the fact of the matter is he certainly seems to be in command of the situation up there. So at this point, you got to do something to get your demoralized and depressed party active, and if it means saying we got to kick his fat ass, then I guess the raging Cajun can say whatever he wants to. But I am reminded of his last political prediction, which was off by he predicted 40 years. He was wrong by 38 of them.
It's interesting because I saw the video, and James Carville looks today like he did the last time I saw him 30 years ago. In other words, he doesn't look a day over 85.
No, that's because he looked awful from the beginning. He got all the aging done. Exactly. And there's a portrait of him in his attic that gets younger.
So here's a little bit to flesh that out. He said, look, and this is again a quote from James Carville, Democratic strategist, if we go and take it to him, meaning take it to Trump, and talk about what a massive fat figure he is, we can run away with this thing. The idea is not to defeat Trump. We have to defeat Trumpism. And the quote, that is kind of the money quote, but he fleshed that out by saying you have to defeat the idea that the United States of America is a place and not an idea. In other words, the focus that he says President Trump has put on essentially racial tension between men and women, tension between gays and straights, it's all BS, Carville said, although he fleshed out that word as well. It's all BS, and we need to call him on it. The country does not want him back. Bill, I'm assuming that James Carville is not living in Appalachia anymore, and I'm just wondering, because I'm not seeing this kind of rising up that he's describing in the people I mix with in Texas. How is it possible that he is seeing a world that's completely different than I am?
Well, first of all, he's James Carville. He makes money by being James Carville and saying things like, we got to kick their fat ass. That's his, if you're going to be a one-trick pony, you got to know the trick. But not only does he not live in Appalachia, he doesn't even live in California. When we had the California primaries just before the lockdown, let's remember very clearly, because this is a very, very important statistic. In the California primaries, at the time, there was a battle between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders. California is the biggest state in terms of delegates. It is the grand prize. And so anybody who had any kind of stake in who the Democratic nominee was going to be would come out for that election. It was a big one. There were only 2 guys left. California was going to decide it. So you'd expect to see Democrats out in force. On the other hand, Donald Trump is running unopposed, essentially. And so there was literally no reason for Republicans to go in that primary, none. There was nobody to vote for, really. It was essentially pointless. In California, as the results were tallied, Donald Trump pulled more voters in to go vote for him, even though there was no need to, than either Biden or Sanders, not more than Biden and Sanders combined, but more votes than either Biden or Sanders in California. That's not a projection. That's not a poll. That's not an estimate. That's data. And that data is so alarming that to the Democrats that they've got to go to tactics like this. And I notice the reverse is true on the side of the Republicans. I notice there's no real, at least among the people I know. Now, the president's the president, and that's why he's elected. But I don't know of any Republican voters or fellow conservatives who are saying, we're going to kick his demented ass down the road. I would describe our position as quietly, optimistically, cautiously confident. And when you're confident, you can afford to be quiet.
Now, Bill, while that's an interesting data point in California, and I think it is at least a curiosity and perhaps more, the fact of the matter is the Democrats in many ways are kind of like the Republicans. It really doesn't matter to them who the party nominates because they're going to vote for that guy when it comes around to the fall anyway. And so
but that doesn't
all
apply
those
to
people,
Trump.
there's going to be a lot more people than turned out in the primary for the Democrats to turn out in the general election. In addition, there'll be independent voters who maybe didn't participate in the primary at all and don't typically do so, who will now participate in the general election. So I'm not sure that we can take much encouragement from that if we're supporters of President Trump.
I disagree completely. It's inconceivable that Mitt Romney or John McCain or George Bush, for that matter, would have been able to turn out more votes in a similar situation than either of the 2 Democratic nominees. Inconceivable. The fact that Donald Trump was able to do that is not so much that he had the numbers to do it. Obviously there will be more people voting in the general election, but there's going to be more Trump people voting in the general election. The point of that California statistic is not something to say that yes, well, it'll be different in the fall. Is to show that no, the difference is in the primary. It's inconceivable. Trump has a base of support that is so non-traditional in so many ways and so fervent. And that's one thing that I have not seen from the Democrats. And that's why you notice that I'm sure he obviously mentioned his name somewhere in the podcast, but for the money quote, James Carville didn't say Biden's got to go out there and kick his fat ass. He didn't say that. He said we've got to. He didn't say Biden's got to take it to Trump. He said we've got to.
He did say that James Clyburn, by endorsing Joe Biden, quote, literally saved the Democratic Party.
Fantastic.
That was the mention of Biden that I heard.
That's absolutely maybe true. He may have saved the Democratic Party, but he saved it to certain defeat if you want my betting money on it. But see, sometimes, Scott, what's not said is more important than what is said. And I think that's a really compelling example of it. He didn't say that Joe Biden's going to do this. He said, we have to. This is very similar to what we talked about just this last week on Occupy Democrats, where the party line on that Facebook page, which we talked about on Right Angle, was not so much that Hillary Clinton should have been president. They were retroactively saying we should have made her into the candidate of change, and we need to make Biden into. This is an admission. Whether they realize it or not, it is a prima facie admission that their candidate is terrible, and so was their last one.
Yeah, but in many ways, these kinds of elections are always a referendum on the incumbent anyway.
Well, the history of incumbents winning elections is far greater than the history of them losing them. So if you want to bring out the incumbent argument,
I'm
that's
just saying
another point.
That's maybe why he didn't focus on their candidate. He's basically saying, look, it's not really about our candidate. It's about Donald Trump and getting rid of him.
There is no question that from the beginning, the left has, I mean, from the night of from when the election was called in November of 2016. From that moment, their entire policy has been, we've got to defeat Donald Trump. And it's tempting for people who are supporters of Trump or who are more or less neutral to look at the vitriol that they have for this guy. And certainly, it's certainly understandable how you could, let's just say it's possible to not like his personality and how he is president and things like that. But that doesn't explain this visceral hatred, doesn't explain the hydroxychloroquine, all of that stuff. That doesn't explain it. What does explain it is that, however imperfectly, he has been destroying everything that the progressives have been trying to build in this country since they infiltrated the education system in the 60s. And this is why Carville resorts to things like saying blacks don't want him and Latinos don't want him. Well, that's not true, James. I mean, they have had record unemployment prior to this pandemic, and that pandemic came from China, and the person who is buddies with China is Joe Biden. The person who's been anti-China from the beginning has been Donald Trump, well before the pandemic. China is undoubtedly going to be a support of China. Previous support of China is going to be a major, if not the major, a single issue of the campaign, and Trump is all over that one. And Biden will be hard pressed to remember where China is, or what it is for that matter. So, however, America has won the fight against corn pop, and I think that's something that Biden will be able to whip Trump on. Is if we should have a corn pop emergency, or if corn pop should reappear on the international stage, then Trump's in some trouble. Because I think Biden's record of dealing with corn pop is unmatched.
Well,
but aside from that,
famous leader once said, we have nothing to fear but corn pop himself. We're going to bring it to a close here and thank the members at BillWhittle.com for making this episode possible. I mentioned up front that our friends over at the Patriot Post are helping out with this too. They are eager to give you something. In fact, two things. They're going to, when you go and sign up for their email list, which you will get free email alerts, they're also going to give you a free copy of the Patriots Primer on American Liberty. And you know,
that's awesome.
you consume, there's an old saying in computers, garbage in, garbage out. In other words, if the code is bad, the result will be bad. If you consume nothing but the mainstream media or social media, there's a tendency for that to kind of manifest itself in your life. Every once in a while, you got to stop and anchor yourself in the principles that make this country great. I encourage you to sign up for that email list. We'll provide a link in the description below and get yourself that copy of the Patriots Primer on American Liberty. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks for watching.
And we will survive Corn Pop 19, my fellow Americans.